Now let's proceed to the learner-centered design. So progressives advocate what have come to be called the learner-centered designs. These designs appear more frequently at the elementary level and preschool levels than at the secondary school level. In this curriculum, students are designers, the makers of what they are experiencing. Teachers provide opportunities for potential experiences. Learner-centered designs essentially stress two of three big ideas regarding thinking about education, that is, socialization and Rousseau's developmental ideas. The first type of learner-centered design is child-centered design. Students must be active in their learning environments, and that learning should not be separate from students' lives. Child-centered design considers knowledge as an outgrowth of personal experiences. The child-centered design has the following proponents. So number one is John Locke, who noted that individuals construct bodies of knowledge from a foundation of simple ideas derived from their experiences. And that number two is Immanuel Kant. He postulated that aspects of our knowledge result from cognitive actions. We construct our universe to have certain properties. Rousseau believed that children should be taught within the context of their natural environment, not in a classroom. And Heinrich Pestalozzi and Friedrich Frobel argued that children attain self-realization through social participation. They voiced the principle of learning by doing. Child-centered design, often attributed to Dewey, was actually conceived by Parker, who laid its foundations. He urged geography teachers to have children experience the content as a geographer out in the field would, by making observations, recording them in sketchbooks, and analyzing them. He believed that effective education did not require strict discipline. He put his views of teaching into practice in developing science and geography curricula. Child-centered curriculum design flourished in the 1920s and 1930s through the work of progressivists such as Ellsworth Collins, who introduced the child-centered curriculum into the public schools of Missouri, and William Kilpatrick, who created the project method, which engaged children in their learning at Lincoln School in New York City. So some curricularists have attempted to have more educators accept child-centered design by way of negotiated curriculum, which involves student-teacher negotiations regarding which content addresses what interests. Having students negotiate the curriculum empowers them. It gives them opportunities to construct their own curricula and learning. Another type of learner-centered design is the experience-centered design. Almost impossible to implement because of the notion that curriculum cannot be pre-planned. So it heavily emphasizes the learner's interests, creativity, and self-direction. In experience-centered design, the teacher's task is to create a stimulating environment in which students can explore, come into direct contact with knowledge, and observe others' learning and actions. The students construct and revise their knowledge through direct participation and active observation. Dewey viewed learning as natural to human activity. One did not need to formally teach learning. Put children in a place that interests them and they commence learning. They become non-scent inquirers, investigators, and they organize their environment and they reflect. In an experience-centered curriculum, the emphasis of design is not on teaching or on learning, but on the activity. In experience-centered design, those who subscribe to this design have faith in the student's uniqueness and ability. They believe that an open and free school environment stimulates all students to excel. Students in optimal school environments are self-motivated, and the educator's role is to provide opportunities, not to mandate certain actions. Teachers who has designed an experience-centered design curriculum has designed potential experiences for students to consider. Students are empowered to shape their own learning with the context furnished by the teacher. Most recently, Reformers who advocate radical school modifications have stressed learner-centered design. These individuals essentially adhere to Rousseau's posture on the value of attending the nature of individuals and Pestalozzi's thinking that individuals can find their true selves by looking to their own nature. Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed influenced the thinking of some present-day radicals. He believed that education should enlighten the masses about their oppression, prompt them to feel dissatisfied with their condition, and give them the competencies necessary for correcting the identified iniquities. Thus, many radicals draw on the theory of Habermas, who emphasizes that education's goal is emancipation of the awareness, competencies, and attitudes that people need to take control of their lives. Curricularists believe that individuals must learn to critique knowledge, and that learning is reflective. It is not externally imposed by someone in power. In this sense, teachers function as awareness makers. Perhaps the biggest difference between the mainstream educators and radicals is that radicals view society as deeply flawed and believe that education indoctrinates students to serve controlling groups. Many radicals view Western intellectual tradition and its standard curricula as imperialistic and oppressive. Curricula with radical design addresses social and economic inequality and injustice. And radical educators are overtly political. So this leads us to the romantic or radical design, which is characterized by teacher-students' actions that break barriers, challenge and unpack preconceptions, critically analyze theories, and discover new ways to process significant questions. Another type of learner-centered design is the humanistic design. It gained prominence in the 1960s and 1970s, partly in response to the excessive emphasis on disciplines during the 1950s and 1960s. Suggested that educators must permit students to feel, value, and grow. Abraham Maslow's concept of self-actualization is heavily influenced by humanistic design. Maslow emphasized that people do not self-actualize until they are 40 or older, but the process begins when they are students. Some educators miss this point and think that their humanistic designs will have students attain self-actualization as an end product. One proponent of humanistic design is Carl Rogers. Rogers advocates self-directed learning, in which students draw on their own resources to improve self-understanding and guide their own behavior. Individuals are able to initiate action and take responsibility and are capable of intelligent choice and self-direction. In 1970s, humanistic education absorbed the notion of confluence education, which blends affective domain with the cognitive domain. In confluence education, humanistic educators realize that cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domains are interconnected and that curricula should address these dimensions. So in confluence education, it stresses participation and emphasizes power, sharing, negotiation, and joint responsibility. It also stresses the whole person and the integration of thinking, feeling, and acting. Lastly, it centers on subject matter's relevance to students' needs and lives. Furthermore, in humanistic design, education should address pleasure and desire such as aesthetic pleasure. It also allows students to experience learning with emotion, imagination, and wonder. Curricular content should elicit emotion as well as thought, and addresses not only the conceptual structures of knowledge but also its implications. And it allows students to formulate a perceived individual and social good and encourages them to participate in a community. However, these are the advantages of humanistic design. It fails to adequately consider the consequences for learners. It emphasizes on human uniqueness, conflicts with its emphasis on activities that all students experience, and it has overemphasized the individual and ignoring society's needs. And it does not incorporate insight from behaviorism and cognitive developmental theory.